Welcome to potentially your last session at Ignite. I am so glad that you took the time to spend it with me. I promise you it is going to be worth your while. We are going to take 45 minutes to talk through the top 10 best practices in adopting Azure. If you stick with me for 45 minutes, I guarantee you'll leave here with at least one thing you didn't know that you can bring back to your company. I think it's going to be a lot more. I will also promise to stick around after the session as long as you guys want. Just bring some beer and we'll hang out. All right, so when you think about your Azure environment, I want you to think about this picture. And what this picture is a picture of a triathlete. And what they're doing is they're riding a tri-bike on a very flat ground that's not bumpy. They're in a streamlined position. They've got their arms on the aero bars and their hands are not on the brakes. And what that tells you is if that person is going to be successful, they better know what they're doing, they better know what's in front of them, and they better not be in a position where they have to brake because they're going to be in a lot of trouble. What this is like is a person on your Azure environment that's been set up well, that's in a position to be successful. We want your app teams, we want your people building dynamic platforms on Azure to be able to be streamlined, to be able to move forward without the feeling that they're going to get stopped, but to do so with confidence because they know that the road that they're traveling on is going to be one that is smooth and provides them with a great experience. And that's what our goal in preparing this for them is, and that's what our expectations are in terms of to provide an environment that will provide a frictionless experience for them. So when we're looking at getting started, I want you to think about first a maturity curve. What I've seen in companies that we've worked with is that companies sit somewhere on this maturity curve at any given point, especially as they're adopting the cloud. On the lower left-hand corner, you see your kind of traditional legacy businesses that are on-premise, they're not enabling, very slow to act for the business, and in order for the business to do anything that they really want to do in the cloud, they're kind of going around IT. IT has become a blocker for innovation rather than an enabler for innovation. As you move up this cloud, where many companies aren't at yet, but I want to get you to today, understanding how to position yourself for, is this operationalized cloud. A position where you've built out an environment that can be governed and an environment that can enable the business to be able to do their job so they can move into higher levels of capability around streamlining the way they build products, to be an innovation differentiator, and then ultimately to fully integrate technology into the mission of the business. Many of the things that you heard Satya Nadella talk about this week is about fully integrating technology into the mission of the business, that the business and technology are one thing, not two separate things. But we can't do that if we introduce friction that prevents them from doing so in a controlled and appropriate way. So when we think about that controlled environment, I think it has a couple key qualities. First, it's still one that's run by the corporation. One of the problems with the lack of an operationalized environment is that application teams do whatever the heck they want. They go around you and they build what they think is right outside the context of appropriate controls. We need to build controls and enablement that lets them be effective at what they are going to do. We also have to enable a variety of workloads. A lot of environments are still thinking about servers, are still thinking about Windows servers running on IaaS, which is a very important part of the cloud. Many companies are saying, I'm out of the data center business. I don't want to be in it anymore. I'm moving my IaaS workloads to the cloud. But another significant portion of companies are deciding one of their first strategies is to build new applications in the cloud. And that's containers, that's serverless, that's PaaS, that's AI, that's digital ledger, it's Dapper, it's all these things that are beyond what the traditional Windows Active Directory domain joined server is. So our environment needs to accompany us along that journey. It also means that we have targeted teams that are operating under corporate oversight, meaning that I have application teams leveraging the cloud that are excited to use it, but they're still operating underneath our corporate oversight. And then finally, that we have an opportunity to translate the relationship between technology spend and business value. And that's really our goal in the first place. Technology spend needs to translate to business value. And the cloud gives us the opportunity to not make IT the dumping bucket of all IT spend. It gives us the opportunity to say, this spend is actually distributed into the business and related to the people who are spending it, who now care about the things that they're building and care about the spend. So our Azure environment needs to accompany us along that journey and include these qualities. So the first thing you need to recognize is that this journey is going to have a change in the characteristics of the organization, the way the organization is structured. And this is for good reason. On the left-hand side, you can see we have the traditional IT organization. And on the right-hand side, you have a modern IT org. Many of you are probably very familiar with the left-hand side. There's a Windows team, there's a Linux team, there's a storage team. There's all these teams that are micro-segmented amongst each other that prevent themselves from being able to work well with each other. As you translate over to this right-hand side, this modern technology org, the role of the corporate IT environment looks like that. Corporate cloud architecture and operations. It's around enablement. It's around taking all those separate teams, building multi-skill frameworks built around automation, and enabling them to be able to govern, define policy, and enable the business to onboard into the Azure environment appropriately, to help them from tripping over their own shoelaces, per se. And then the rest of the organization starts to break out. You see these sort of business enablement organizations that may be run by a CTO. You see these application product teams, some of which are in Corp IT, some of which are in the business. And sometimes people say to me, what, my business application teams don't have DevOps, corporate IT. They don't have, app teams. I don't have DevOps people in the business right now. You will. That's just a matter of time. It doesn't happen right now. It's going to happen in the future. And part of the role of corporate IT in this structure is to enable the business to have those kinds of teams or loan them out and say, this team needs to be able to have some enablement and leveraging the cloud for an AI workload. Well, that's the role of Corp IT to onboard them. So that's why this skill translation is so important, is getting these skills on the left-hand side translated over into the multi-skill frameworks of the right-hand side. All right, number 2. As you build this out, it needs to be defined in iterative steps. Iterative steps meaning available in short periods of time and built on top of each other in small wins. So this is what we see typical cloud programs look like. So companies right now are sometimes determining ahead of time what they want their cloud environment to look like. Usually they're saying, tell me a little bit about what my cloud migration strategy might look like before I put my toe in the water. But I think many companies have decided the cloud's going to be some percentage of my environment. I just don't know how much. So sometimes you're doing some work up front in a cloud assessment of your own environment to determine what that is. But then right on the tails of that, you're defining a minimum viable product. And that minimum viable product needs to account for the most pressing needs of the business. The problem is that many businesses are in a position where way over here, the business is already doing things in the cloud. You need to catch up. So it makes the MVP even more important, right? Because way over here is when the business started doing it, and they need to catch up to over here. In conjunction with that MVP, you start doing an app rationalization. Now, there's 2 scenarios where this can come into play. One is, I have a corporate direction to get out of the data center business. In that case, maybe you're doing an M&A, maybe you're doing a mass migration, maybe you just want to be out. You're doing wave planning, and that wave planning is around 90, 60, 30, get out, in terms of each workload, broken into pieces. But you might not have a plan like that. It might be more about enabling new workloads. And maybe your existing workloads, you may be just kind of waiting for them to die. So over here, you're starting to build out these plans. And the app rationalization is not just a one-time project. It's an iterative program where you're intaking opportunities to be able to innovate, deliver, execute, and you're feeding work streams. You might be feeding a migration work stream for IaaS, or you're feeding an enablement work stream for other types of workloads. So the IaaS work stream might be 90, 60, 30, and are broken into these segments, whereas this is app 1, app 2, app 3. You start to build that iterative muscle memory around how to onboard workloads into the cloud. And then finally down here at the bottom, the thing that everybody forgets about is building cost analysis muscle memory. The idea of my Corp IT organization has a capacity and ability to engage my application teams to understand what their current costs are and help them rationalize them to look for cost savings. One example of a cost savings program, we built a classification structure where any sandbox environment automatically self-destructs at the end of the week. That's pretty cool, right? Well, the business got on board because it built around redeployability of their environment. But that was based on that cost analysis work stream, understanding a problem, solving a problem. But they did it early on. See, it starts right when the MVP is. You know where most people put that in place? When they've got a problem. That's too far down the road. So start to do it up front, and you'll be in a position to be successful. So when you build this program, be careful about overreaching, I think is one of my key points here. Be careful about overreaching. Sometimes when the business is run ahead of you, you need to earn back the right to work with them. Earn back the right to work with them. Very, very common in larger enterprises where they think of Corp IT as in their way rather than being a partner. This is an opportunity to reestablish partnership and to refocus on being a business enabler. All right, number 3, build a blueprint that's manageable. This is called bad structure number 1. You may have heard that you should put everything in one subscription. This is wrong. Don't do it. It's old news. I've heard Microsoft people say it. I've had non-Microsoft people say it. It's not the right structure. You run into subscription boundaries. You run into management boundaries. It's not a good idea. Here's the other bad structure. This is an ode to anybody who started Azure when I did, when there was no resource groups, and this was the only way to structure your environment. Okay, so this is the best structure to use almost regardless of environment size, and it's based on the Cloud Adoption Framework. So if you've been reading into that, you've been looking into it, some good sessions there, this is the best structure. So one thing I'll show you here is that there's a segmentation horizontally and vertically. On the left-hand side, you have IT. On the right-hand side, you have the business. And then right across the middle, you have management groups, and then you have subscriptions. Okay, so the top layer is the management groups. Management groups are your logical structure for organizing your subscriptions. Who's using management groups today? Okay, 20, 40% of you? Okay, they came out over a year ago, right? So this is a really great structure to put in place. This is important. And it's the attachment point for policy. So right here, or here, for example, you'll attach policy as a mechanism to deploy what's important within the environment to ensure it's running the right qualities of things. Tagging, or structures for backup, or auditing the settings of the environment. Now, why separate Corp IT and business areas? The reason why you separate them is because Corp IT and the business areas have no reason to be in the same subscription. They have, in the same way, you don't take two app teams and put them in the same subscription in the same areas and let them interfere with each other. You don't do the same thing with Corp IT. You protect its environment. You protect the things that are important to it, the express route config, or the Active Directory domain controllers, and the other things that are important to Corp IT. You put them in their own subscription. And you build up, just like you would an app environment, dev, prod, QA. You build up these structures that contain subscriptions and resource groups. On the right-hand side, you have that same kind of function with business units and application teams. Now, maybe you don't have a lot of business units. Great. You make one business unit management group. And then underneath there, you put application teams and subscriptions, and you break them into resource groups. What's great about this is it's really easy to segment it, and it's really easy then to attach policy to inherit the things that are important to you. The other thing that this provides is it provides an ability to easily scale out and scale up, frankly, because it allows your subscriptions to scale with the app rather than a collection of apps. Using this structure will allow you to be able to start on the right foot and to adjust. Now, the question people have is, well, what happens if I didn't start with this? And that's okay. Usually what ends up happening is you either have a high density of IT-centric things or a high density of app-centric things, and you simply drain it of the things that are not the other, right? So usually people moved IT stuff first, so they drain it of the apps. Or they move mostly app stuff first, so they drain it of the apps. They drain it of central IT, and they move it into another subscription. This also allows for you to contain other structures for test units and things of that nature. So follow this structure. All right, number 4, approaches for provisioning, short-term, long-term. This is by far my favorite subject of this whole thing. All right, so this is the worst possible thing you can do, using a portal to do provisioning of workloads in Azure. There's 2 scenarios where people are doing portal provisioning. One is they're using portal.azure.com, next, provision, click, click, click. Right? They're doing all the same mistakes that we did on premise in the cloud environment. The other area, and actually this is starting to come full circle now, the other area where people have made this mistake is with CMPs. They've bought a ServiceNow or a Sherwell or whatever other product that is well-intentioned and has a lot of good things about it. No knock on those vendors, they have a lot of great things about them. But they put a portal in between their users in Azure. The problem is that the reason we built those portals is because we were trying to simplify the on-premise environment for our users because nobody wanted to work with all those 12, 13, 14 teams necessary to get anything done. The problem is that after they provision something, all the same problems exist. They don't remember what the original configuration was. They don't have the technique of going back to the old version after they screwed something up. There's no control mechanisms around checking to make sure the changes are appropriate before they're done. We tried to implement things like change management. It never really worked. This is a bad practice. Don't bring it into the cloud. Get modern. This is the right solution. This is the right solution. I've implemented this at companies that have many tens of thousands of users, many tens of thousands of servers. This is a scalable approach. You just need the guts to do it. In this way of executing, your Azure portal is view only, with the exception of maybe playgrounds, okay? Someone's learning in a playground that self-destructs at the end of the week, cool. Let them click, click, click to play whatever they want. Anything else, Azure portal is view only. You build a technique for them to do source code release as their way of provisioning in Azure. So they put their stuff in a source code repo. It deploys through a release management process. It gets deployed into the Azure environment. When they go to change it, they make changes to the source code. So what kind of source code are we talking about here? Well, first we've got infrastructure. Infrastructure is code, configuration is code, app is code, right? Well, what if I've got an application that I just kind of bought off the shelf, it's installed on a Windows server, it's 2008, whatever it is, like some kind of ancient application. It's still infrastructure as code, people. When you deploy this thing into Azure, it's infrastructure as code. If you don't take that infrastructure as code and put it in a source code repo for release management, you know what you did? You wasted an opportunity to use infrastructure as code because you deployed it that way, you just didn't build a way to update it. So use this opportunity to do this right, and it does 2 things. A, it's the right way anyway. B, it prepares you to work with all those non-server-based workloads because your app teams are using infrastructure, app, and configuration as code anyway. So when they're doing those 3 things, in the app environment, upskilling in the virtual machine environment allows you to gain the knowledge necessary to execute for the latter workloads. And it builds the right techniques and the right operational model. At this point, ARM is implementing the control plane. It's saying you can only deploy things that you have the right qualities around, the right tagging, the right sizing, the right regions, all the things that are appropriate. You compare this with things like Terraform. We do a lot of Terraform work. So if you're doing Terraform projects, You could punch that on the front. Or you could use ARM and Azure DevOps and be good there too. This also works in a multi-cloud environment. So if you do have AWS, if you do have Oracle or Google out there, using the Azure portal as the primary view-only experience for Azure, using AWS as the primary view-only experience for AWS, and then using code to deploy into both allows you to have one deployment experience across your clouds without buying into some vendor's CMP. All right, so this busted out looks a little bit like this. This is what we would call Horizon 3, the destination zone, destination environment. I want to show you what an interim looks like when you're doing a migration. So when you're moving workloads to the cloud, let's say you're doing a large-scale move. That large-scale move, all this is the same, right? But when you're lifting and shifting workloads to the cloud right now, using something like Azure Migrate, it moves those workloads into the cloud, and they're there. The problem is that that lifted workload is not, it's infrastructure as code in the way it's deployed, but it's not infrastructure as code in the way that it's redeployable. Like, it's there once, but it's not built to be updated through the release management pipeline. So my recommendation, and this is what we do in every one of our projects, is we backport our configuration into infrastructure as code on top of what we just moved. So that way we have one operational model that everything is run through, rather than two. Like oh, this is everybody's stuff that was moved at one point, and it's using operational model 1, and then here's operational model 2. Don't do that. Try to have one operational model if you can. All right, number 5, defining structures for naming and tagging. This is critical. You can't do half the stuff that's ladder in this without these structures in place. So this would be an example of a best practices structure for naming and tagging. There are some iterations of this. This is largely similar to what's in the cloud adoption framework, so same kind of structure. You can change it around, you can remove dashes, you can do what you think is appropriate here. But these qualities existing there are really important. So, the service, the description, Azure object, the moniker, meaning production, dev, QA, the region you happen to live in, and some kind of extra index number in case you're deploying on top of something. So knowing about having a consistent naming standard. And this is something you can implement through ARM that protects your environment. You do not want Nate's dev server in your environment or Bob's test box. Save that for the playground, right? Don't let that be in your production QA or stage environments. All right, and then there's critical tags. These are the most important tags to capture within your environment. The team that owns it, the business unit it's tied to, the application's name, you might be calling it service name, but a name for it. Classification, let me explain what I mean by classification. This is like, this would be like environment, highly critical, sensitive environment, low criticality environment, mid criticality environment, business critical app, different kinds of classifications of what this is. Why have that? The reason you have that is because then policy has something defined in the environment to apply qualities to. So if you have, for example, a highly critical, sensitive environment, then you know that you could apply a policy that says, well, this SQL database tied to that needs to be encrypted, and I can have policy look for that. If you don't have that kind of moniker, then you have nothing for policy to look for. So you're in trouble, right? So get a consistent classification schema for both security and control to look for, so that way you can apply it. Usually this starts with like a recovery policy, like you're like talking about what needs to be recovered first, second, and third. You can usually kind of pull from that kind of environment to be able to get some of that moniker. Usually you start with like 30 different classifications and you get down to like 4 that actually matter. So don't get too scared by that. You can get to some pretty simple classification structures there. And then cost center. One of the best things you can do is to distribute the costs to the people that are using them and make them own the costs. Cost center is the first step in doing so, even if it's still held technically by central IT. All right, number 6, recovery and redeployment approaches. Assume redeployability at every level. This especially goes for Corp IT. You know, what's interesting is I see a lot of environments that have done redeployability in apps, but the Corp IT environment was like some guy logged into the Azure CLI and typed a bunch of stuff in, and it's just in a configuration that they've got, right? Like, that's just what they have. And something goes wrong, and they have no idea how to get the one back. Well, the problem is that, like, that fails, and all the other stuff downstream fails. So redeployability of configuration in this case is just as important as redeployability of, like, the apps themselves or the data. So Corp IT can be built in a release management pipeline just like apps can. Leverage Azure Backup as required for all resource groups. That's something you would look at policy to audit and make sure exists, ensuring that you're in a position to be able to be successful at that. Also, redeployability in things like AKS, app services, data, functions, all the aspects of the Azure environment where redeployability is key. Backup is tied to, redeployability is an important part. This kind of idea is how you can do things like automatic self-destructive environments, because you mandated redeployability, which then saves costs, which also increase structure and ability to know what's out there and ability to audit who deployed what. Once you go to this kind of approach, everything else gets better downstream, right? It might be harder the first time you provision. It's not as easy as going into the portal and clicking new virtual machine deploy, right? But downstream, everything's better. And you could say we don't have the skills. Get them, right? This is the time. Number 7, adapting security controls to a cloud-consistent world. If you haven't gone to a security session, this is kind of your high level. One of the most important things to do when you move into Azure, especially for virtual machines, is to take the opportunity to implement a vertical network design. So you might say, what is that? Well, on the left-hand side, you have what most on-premise environments look like. Very shared, wide networks where stuff talks to stuff. And we never really know what talks to what because we never really took the time to do it. And because we had so many teams, nobody had the knowledge to be able to figure that out. On the right-hand side, we have much more contextualized applications. So let me show you another view of that. So this would be 3 applications, okay? This is 1, 2, and 3. And each of these are contained within resource groups. Probably even, you know, ironically, probably within different subscriptions too. And then to talk to each other, they're moving through network security groups. What goes in the security group and out of the security group is governed based on a set of rules. This is a micro-network segmentation that we can do when we move to the cloud. And the reason why we can implement it is because when I move things to the cloud, I need to know what they talk to anyway. So my tools I use to be able to do the wave planning, to be able to do the structures on what moves first, second, and third, are the same tools I use to do the definition of the network rules of what can talk to what. And it's a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to capture that as infrastructure as code again, put that in a source code repo, deploy it, and manage this just like a high capability network environment that it deserves to be. This is your opportunity. You only get a couple good chances to do this ever. Why didn't we do it in the on-premise environment that we have today? Because it's hard. It's really, really hard. It takes a lot of people and a lot of alignment. But when you move to the cloud, you need to do it anyway, so take the opportunity to do it. Frankly, I think this is the #1 reason to move legacy workloads to the cloud. Because if you think about how on-premise environments get taken advantage of through security, it's through lateral movement. What are we doing when we implement micro-network segmentation? We're mitigating lateral movement in the data center environment. One of the best things you can do, apart from some of the endpoint stuff that you can take, where you take endpoints off the network. This is gold. Use this opportunity to do it. Also, take advantage of Azure Security Center. Every environment's got it. Leverage it. It can assess patching and security policy. You have the opportunity when you move to the cloud to move to Azure Update Management as opposed to necessarily using SC Configuration Manager. This can also assess web-based applications. It can do threat protection for AKS. This is a new feature. This capability this was just announced at Ignite. Huge environment. One of the things I see a lot of companies doing when we move to the cloud is they're actually mandating a percentage of applications they want to be moved into containers. So say, we're moving 2,000 virtual machine workloads to the cloud, and they'll say, I want 5% of that moved into containers. One reason is because they want to get the experience. The second reason is because, well, they want to do containers. I'm not sure. Sometimes they just want to do it. But the point of that is that there's an opportunity to do threat protection around it, in and around the container infrastructure. And when you're doing containers for a good reason, which is many, you now know how to do it. Also, there's great plugins from external vendors to do scanning in the VM environment, like Qualys, Rapid7, that have virtual agents, like as opposed to putting a physical sort of module on your on-premise environment, they have these virtual agents that will scan the environment for you. Also, you have the opportunity to take action based on things. So if you're running a tool to manage tickets and track things, when something bad happens in the environment, you can connect this into that and then do a ticket that's tied to it that has to be responded to. That's a pretty high capability way of executing on this, but I have a security team that I worked with for a company. So they, just like in that diagram where you had cloud ops and you had security separate, so this security organization was auditing the Azure environment, and they used Security Center to do that. And I thought that was a fantastic practice because then they had their own sort of separate security auditing mechanism that was checking, not truly a red team, but like kind of additional blue team on the on-prem, on the rest of the teams. There's a shot of that, which I think is great. Okay, so a couple other things. Don't use your normal email for admin accounts. Segment that usage. Owner barely needs to be used. Owner's got so much power in the environment. You do not need to use owner rights. You can very easily disseminate rights to environments with much less privilege, and then do owner rights only when necessary. So what I think is a really great practice has worked fantastic is to tie PIM, Privileged Identity Management, to owner escalation and usage. And then you send out, even have it send an email to the admin group whenever that's used, of the people that care about it. So, anybody heard of PIM? Do you know what that is? Yeah? Okay, cool. All right, so it's got some bugs, it's got some flaws, but overall the idea of PIM is really strong. Because what it really allows you to do is to say, even if I have the right credentials, I still need to take an extra step. Like let's say I'm logged into my jump box with my admin credentials, somehow that gets taken advantage of, and then they move from the jump box to Azure to try to do something. Well, even then, when they try to elevate themselves to owner credentials, they need to do a multi-factor auth prompt. I'm notified. No, I'm not logged in as my owner credential. No, I'm not asking to do that, and it can prevent it. So the additional step tied to that is a really important quality because, frankly, you can't walk into the data center doors anymore. You need to have those additional protections in place. And then if you do one thing, implement multi-factor authentication. And if you think this is getting obvious at this point, I literally just saw a statistic that the percentage of Azure environments that have multi-factor auth enabled is less than 8%. Less than 8%. Like, we can't even hit 10%. This is super important. I mean, you want your username and password, Hello Kitty 1, to be the thing that prevents you from getting into the Azure environment? Spray and pray, watch out. I mean, this is critical stuff. So if you haven't done this yet, please focus on getting this in place because this is going to really help you and prevent people from taking advantage of your Azure environment via phishing and a whole variety of other problems. RBAC applied to applications. When you build out Azure environments via, you don't have that spread out structure with management groups and subscriptions and so on. You put in subscriptions. Inside of that, when they build RBAC, they build the resource groups. RBAC should be then automatically applied to those resource groups to have the right rights to the right people. And one of the best ways to do that is to have an application registry somewhere. And I don't really care what tool you use, but some kind of application registry that relates to what is an important application in your environment. And before they can provision, it needs to be named. And named something that is in that registry that they then provision against. And that registry contains the owner, it contains the people, it contains certain qualities about it. And you can pull users and so on from there. That could be an Excel spreadsheet, it could be ServiceNow, it just doesn't really matter what you're using, but having that kind of registry to dictate this can be a good step. All right. A little bit of a breakdown between two confusing terms that are security-centric, app services versus app services environments. It's getting to a point where you probably don't need to use app services environments at all. Last year, when I gave a similar talk, there were still reasons to be using app service environments. Now with the announcement of Azure Private Link for PaaS services, it's becoming really straightforward to allow for that. So my suggestion, and the reason I put this in here is because this comes up with every customer that wants to do something securely, is build competency around running PaaS-based services. And when those PaaS-based services need to interact with the on-premise environment, ask yourself why we have an on-premise environment in the first place. Because we should be running zero trust models. So a zero trust model would operate just fine in an app service environment that's run like an external application and an end user that's run like an external user, both zero trust, both interacting with each other through trust barriers. And if we really need to connect that application on premise, then things like Azure Private Link are starting to become really nice assets there. We'll hit questions afterward. Phil, thanks for asking. Yeah, well, it's definitely building out right now. Yeah. All right. Number 8, modern responsibilities change as application owners take more responsibility. One of the things that's happening is that the Corp IT environment is not necessarily something that has responsibilities taken for. It's not something that the Corp IT environment is going to have to care for all the applications anymore. I'm sort of thinking about how many Corp organizations, they have this sort of central NOC that's accountable for everything. And when something goes bump in the night, they're accountable for fixing that thing. The Corp IT environment is now going to be accountable for the cloud platform. The cloud platform in terms of how it interacts with different things and how it enables the application teams. But then what's happening is that the actual accountability for the apps running in the cloud are operated by the application teams that are accountable for those applications. They're running DevOps, SRE kinds of functions. So this I'm running one central monitoring environment that everything kind of aggregates into, that's not the future. The idea is instead is that app teams are running application monitoring within the context of their Azure environments or cloud environments, and they're accountable for that. It may relate into a single tool. You may still use like a ServiceNow to track the tickets and do certain types of change management and so on. But the relationships between those application teams in the cloud environment are kind of like partners rather than those teams kind of aggregating back up to some kind of Corp IT zone. So getting comfortable in building out an infrastructure that aligns to that is a really important step. That's where things like Azure Monitor come into play. So using things like Azure Monitor allow for you to build out a structure where Corp IT knows what it needs to know, but your application teams also then know what they need to know and can operate their own application environments and their Corp environments together. And when Corp IT needs to be involved, they're involved because of some greater problem, some Azure data center disaster or something like that. All right, number 9. This is a little bit of a intellectual question. Intellectual is probably the wrong word, but it's a little bit of a theoretical question, but it's actually, I think, something very practical too. What does it do to my CMDB and how does it change? So I have a long history working with CMDBs and have built many of them. Unfortunately, many CMDBs didn't tend to provide a lot of value beyond the fact that they were a place where the application registry lived. And what I'm seeing is that the modern cloud environment is an opportunity to be able to build out kind of a living CMDB in the sense that the cloud environment itself is queryable and the code that you deploy into the environment is stored in a source code repository. So rather than the CMDB containing the relationship between the things that are tied to the service that I gathered from various places, that's stored in code, and it's stored in a way that I can query the operational platform to gather what's important to me and bring that back and do something with it. And that's getting better every year. Last year when we gave this, only the resource graph had just been announced, and it was just available. Now the resource graph is so much more fully functional, so much more capable. You can pull information from all sorts of places. Fantastic. So we can pull that information and leverage it as necessary. So a couple examples, I put a link. You can download this deck later, but there's a link to being able to get examples of how you can pull information out of the resource graph. So when you're automating, rather than automating against like a copy of the production environment that exists in some kind of CMDB, you can automate against information gathered from the production environment that's up to whenever the last query was run. Allows you to be able to do a lot more. And the relationship between that and data that's stored in the source code repo for deployment purposes accounts for a much more important way to deal with problems that exist. So when something went wrong, I think this is my way of gauging it. When something went wrong, when an application was down, how often do people go to the CMDB to fix it? Almost never. Instead, what they did is they went to the place where the thing was broken. This allows us to have a place that's accurate to the deployed configuration, which we edit to fix it. Allows us to have that control and also that ability to understand what the environment really looks like. All right, number 10. This doesn't mean the least important thing, it just means that it builds on everything else, is building a methodology for cost reviews and organizational discipline. So in order to implement cost analysis, you need to have appropriate tagging in place. If you don't have appropriate tagging, you can't do cost management. You're in a position of weakness because you can't do it. I'd say 9 out of 10 environments that I start looking at that have come to us and said, hey, I need help, that are sometimes very large, haven't built out appropriate tagging, so they can't do appropriate cost management. And then having to go back and do that is really complicated. So those same tags we talked about being able to judge costs on are the same ones that we talked about being important to tag things on, are the same ones that we need to judge costs on. Azure Cost Management has gotten very sophisticated. If you have a multi-cloud environment, by all means, use a cost management platform for that other multi-cloud environment for those application owners. The best thing you can do is let the application owner go to one environment, be able to work in that environment, do cost management in their environment. When you have an opportunity where they're inside of a different cloud, let them go there and do cost management there. But when you get to a need to do more aggregate cost management, that's where you might use another tool. You might put it in a ServiceNow or something like that that does more kind of cross-platform aggregation. But you don't need that to do high degrees of cost management right within the platform. There's a lot higher degree of cost savings capability that's built into Azure Cost Management right now that allows it to even tell you opportunities to optimize. So a couple examples of this. This is one that's based on type and resource group structuring. So you can see the resource group names, broken down there. Another example would be a prod versus a non-prod. So this would be the prod environment, non-prod. Using a label to be able to differentiate between the environments and know, cost basis for each of those. Another environment would be based on business unit. So being able to say, corp environment, e-commerce, accounting, app dev. This is where these tags come into play, right? You'd be like, well, wow, big deal. This is just kind of like Power BI. But if we didn't do the right tagging up front, we could never get this. But now that we have it, we can put ourselves in a position to dictate back to the business. Make sure you're also setting budgets. This is where your cost management team comes to play. They engage the teams, they work on setting the budgets, they help them steward their environment, they provide them the feedback necessary on how they will improve. All right, same thing with resource group, same thing with targeting high spenders, looking at opportunities to optimize. Your cost management team should pay for itself. That's really what it comes down to. You allocate 16 hours a month, 40 hours a month, whatever it is, it should pay for itself. All right, cool. Well, that is 45 minutes. we have hit it. This is my Twitter account, so by all means, go catch up with me there. I will be around as long as you want to talk after this. Super thankful you took this last 45 minutes of your Ignite to come hang out with me, and have a great afternoon.